issue. All right, Pete, we are back. It is the Lex and Pete show. This is the Sprite Cranberry Division episode. So we've already done the divisional previews for the LeBron Haters Division and the Gabagool Division. So this week we are wrapping that up with the Sprite Cranberry Division. I do think it's a very interesting one. I think it's a very contentious one to talk about. A lot of people think it's the best. Some people argue it's the worst. So I'm very excited to get into that. Before we start talking about anything else, though, as always, we will get a word from our sponsors, Sundog Multimedia. Sundog is an online communication and social media company. What started as a personal tool has since evolved into something much bigger, allowing users to communicate, research, and discover things that impact their lives and daily decisions. Sundog will collaborate with you to build and execute a modern yet nimble social media strategy by utilizing innovative and traditional media principles. Sundog is also a proud supporter of the Stop Soldier Suicide Foundation. You can follow them on Instagram at Sundog_multimedia. That's on Instagram at Sundog_multimedia. Brains, brawn, and true professionalism. That's easy peasy moving and service. Muscle for hire, moving, assembly, errands, you name it. They will do it. Easy Peasy is a multi-service team. If you need something, just ask. All right, Pete. So this is our final, I guess you could call it off-season episode. We are wrapping up the divisional previews. We are now at the time of filming this, recording this, whatever, less than 24 hours away from the start of the NFL season. Before I pass it over to you, I will remind everybody, because this episode will be dropping in the morning at some point. I don't know. I do work tomorrow, so once I log on, I'll just throw it together and get that up. So a brief reminder, Taxi Squad's lock at the start of the game. I don't know how tight that is. I don't know if as soon as the kicker's foot touches the ball, it's over. I don't know if it's the coin flip. Don't risk it to chance. Just figure it out overnight. Figure it out this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're listening to it, and just figure out who's on your taxi squad. It will lock. You can still take people off. So if you put somebody on and they get their opportunity in the season and they start going off, you can take them off. You just will not be able to put anybody back on. So it's rookies only. The app won't allow you to add anybody to it. So that doesn't matter. You will only be able to add rookies to it. But Pete, as I said, we are less than 24 hours away from the start of the season. It'll be Chiefs Lions. I don't think either of us have anybody that's in that game. Of course, you normally would have Jameson Williams, but he's missing the first 6 games of the season, I believe. How are you feeling with the season starting? Looking ahead to Sunday, especially, I'm sure you're very excited. This is a very big year for you. Of course, you've called it a rebuilding year, but you have a lot of these pieces that you've been waiting on. So I'm sure you're excited to get out there and compete.
I'm fired up. 24 hours outside of and a kickoff NFL football season. Absolutely fired up, expecting a big step out of Slippery Pete's team this year. Still a rebuilding year, but expecting a big step. And I also got to shout out the viewers. I threw it in the league chat earlier this week, but all-time view record in the last Lex and Pete episode. We currently just topped at 52 views, shattering the previous record of 38 views on the McMurrow episode of last season. So shout out to the viewers.
Yeah, so as you who are you playing? I was trying to pull up your matchup. I just wanted to see if we could get a quick
I think the Suns.
You're going against the most athletic Suns, so we've already done your divisional preview. We're still waiting on their response
I have an answer
in terms of that bet. So actually, we were talking pre-show. We said there wasn't anything really to talk about in terms of league news. You and I, we have engaged in a bet. Even odds, $50. And what did I say? Was it 25 fab?
25 fab, yep.
25 fab for next year. So we have conditions on when that needs to be paid off. We are just doing a head-to-head most points for matchup. I will say it took a little bit of a hit today at the quarterback position, but I am working on it. We'll get to that when we talk about my team. But we have engaged in that bet. But I think the more interesting story, because we're talking about this week 1 matchup, is you versus the most athletic Suns. You did want odds. What did we propose? 2-1?
You threw 2-1 out there. I countered with 3-1 and did not
Yep.
hear a response.
3-1 odds. Yes, that's right. You would be putting up $33. They'd be putting up 99. They have been in the chat. I know for sure that they saw our bet that was made. I guess it is time for me to maybe send a reminder and just put them on blast a little bit. But I am looking to get that because we do want to get that bet in before the season starts too. So maybe right now I'll actually put it in the league chat.
And
And we'll just
I hope it's something that catches fire too. I mean, the name of this league is Friends Who Gamble. You look at the Strokers, Slippery Pete, and the Suns, not likely to make the playoffs this year. I mean, KB, we just made a $50 bet. That's half the league buy-in. I mean, that gives us something to play for this year. That gives us something to look at and keep track of week to week. We both don't own our own 24 first, so we are going to be trying to score as many points as possible. And I'm hoping something catches on in the league. We are Friends Who Gamble.
Yeah, I just put a message in the league chat. I tagged you as well as both owners of the Most Athletic Suns. So I hope that gets the ball rolling. Like I said, I want to get it before the season starts just to have it feel like a good, official, clean bet. So I'd like to see something like that. And like you said, I would like to see it catch on. I do think that if we could create some type of gambling market within this league, I think it's part of the overall vision. So it'd be nice to really get started on that. But besides that, I mean, is there really anything else that we're going to talk about? Or are you ready to jump into the Sprite Cranberry?
No, I think let's hop into Sprite Cranberry.
All right. So as always, we'll do the same format that we've been doing for the other two. We're just going to go by the standings from last year. So first place last year was the Bussey Boys. They went 12-2. They had a very dominant season. I believe they were third in scoring. They might have dropped to fourth, but I think they were in third. They lost in the semifinals. Number two, we have Big Brain LLC. They scored 1,812.52 points. They were just beat out by Two Pins. I think Two Pins beat them out by like a decimal. So it was that close. I forget exactly. I actually meant to check in on that. I forgot to do that. I wanted to see how Big Brain has gone year by year in scoring because I know that they've been declining a bit and the league's been catching up to them a little bit. But they put up a massive number last year. They lost to the Vibers in the first round. I don't think they have a playoff win yet. We'll talk more about that, though. I'm looking forward to it. Third, we had Wallace. He finished eighth in scoring. He was the fifth overall pick. And then fourth was myself, the Slow Stroke Kings. We finished 10th in scoring, third overall pick, but I did not have my pick. That was Bowen ended up with that one. You had it. You traded it to Bowen. Bowen took Anthony Richardson. I don't know what I traded it for, but I'm sure it worked out just fine. I'm very happy with all the moves that I've made. All right, so let's start at the top. Let's get right into the Bussey Boys. So this is a team, I mean, we've talked about it right now. The league meta seems to be the strong two quarterback tandem. So this is a team that arguably has the best quarterback duo in the league with Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson. They also have Matt Stafford, who, he's kind of cooked in my eyes. I don't even know if he's going to be able to finish the season. We know that Cooper Kupp's going to be out for week one. And then his fourth quarterback is Mike White, who could be interesting if Tua were to continue to get injured. But I mean, for the time being, he's firmly in that backup role. So it's really stacked with that Hurts and Jackson. Stafford is to be determined, I guess. And then Mike White, of course. But how are you feeling about the quarterback position with the Bussey Boys? Do you think that this is, do you feel like this is the best? How do you kind of rank those top ones? I'd say it's really right now between him and Two Pins, right, with Mahomes and Herbert.
Yeah, and then I'm probably putting Mikey at third with Burrow and Fields. But I think I'd put the Bussey Boy QB tandem second in the league behind Two Pins.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I think the Two Pins just has to kind of get it by default. It's Pat Mahomes. I don't care if he finishes QB1, QB4, he's still the best. So having that and having that safety, I think, is really interesting. We've talked a lot about the Ravens offense, though. So I think that it's a good time to talk about Lamar Jackson too. So yep. I know that you're kind of down on the offense. I do think, or at least I like to think that I might have started to sway you maybe a little bit when I was talking about who they brought in and what it looks like they're going to be scheming up. But I'm very optimistic about Lamar Jackson because they've brought in, and now I'm blanking on his name, but this new offensive coordinator,
Todd Monken.
Yep, Todd Monken. So they got out with Greg Roman, who was Mr. 12 personnel. Really loved using, going the tight formations, using the tight ends, all that. They've gone away with that. They brought in a guy that's really used the spread offense. As he was down at Georgia, he's had opportunities down in Tampa Bay. He was the offensive coordinator in Cleveland. And at certain times, especially as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, he has put up a lot of numbers or big numbers in terms of pass attempts. So I think that that's what they're trending towards, right? They just paid Lamar Jackson a ton of money. They have really kind of lost out on what could have been great seasons the last couple of years because Lamar's gotten hurt, and a lot of that is attributed to his running. I think that they're paying him, and they want to pay him to play a full 17 games and the playoffs. So I think that they want to start having him stay in the pocket a little bit more, maybe relying on a more traditional run game. Of course, you still want to use them and you still want to work those in, but that doesn't want to be the default, right? So they want him to start passing. They brought in Odell, who sure they overspent, but I mean, to me, that tells me that they're really committed to this passing game, right? They also have Mark Andrews, who is one of the best tight ends in the league, arguably second best. And then, they drafted Zay Flowers. They have Rashad Bateman, who I'm not personally high on, but a lot of people refuse to give up on. I think that they're going to be passing a ton. So I like that he's going to get that passing volume. I do think from a fantasy perspective, I'm curious to see how it impacts his game if he's not going to be running as much. Is it going to be able to balance out, or is it going to be, maybe it helps him play a full 17, but he's not going to be getting that same rushing upside. And then Jalen Hurts, I mean, you could honestly make the same argument, right? They just paid him a ton of money. I think that they know that you need to be able to pass in the NFL if you want to win the Super Bowl. So I think that both of these guys, it's to be seen if they're going to take a little bit of a step back in terms of rushing attempts, but they're still at the top. Let's stick on Lamar Jackson. How are you feeling about that Ravens offense?
Yeah, you definitely changed my opinion of the Ravens offense as a whole. I do still stand by the decision or whatever outlook that I don't like the Ravens wide receivers. They might be good players. Odell might still have some left in the tank. Zay might be, could be their future wide receiver one, even though he's a really small guy. But I think I forget the stat, but we were talking about a month ago. There hasn't been a 1,000-yard receiver in Baltimore in the last 5 years or something like that since Hollywood Brown. So I forget what the stat was. I do think Munkin's definitely gonna change that. You definitely changed my mind in the Ravens offense as a whole, but I don't like the pass catchers. I do love Lamar. He's a top 7 quarterback with top 5 upside. But the thing is, and you hit the nail on the head, is he going to play a full 17 game season? 12 full games the last 2 years out of Lamar, missing at least 5 games a season. And last year was I think it was the last 6 games of the season. He played the first 12 and then was out week 13 and on. So that's really what it comes down to, is this quarterback tandem is a top 3 quarterback tandem in the league, 2 top 7 guys, top 5 upside, but they're both running quarterbacks and they carry that injury risk. So if Lamar stays healthy, this quarterback duo brings the Bussey Boys to the playoffs. Now, I won't bury the lead. I've got the Bussey Boys winning the division, Sprite Cranberry, but can Lamar stay healthy, because he's missed 5 games the last 2 years, or 5 games per year the last 2 years.
Yeah, and hopefully that is what happens, right? He starts passing more, and that saves his legs. It avoids those different injuries that he's picked up. I was just pulling up his stats. So his career high in passing yards was his sophomore season. It was when he finished QB1. That must have been 2019. That was his MVP season. So yep. He played 15 games, QB1, put up 415.68 points. He had 3,127 yards, 36 touchdowns. I do think that it's a lock. I should actually check that out. I'm curious what his passing yards total is this year, but I think that he's a lock
4,000
to go over that. I don't know 4,000. I'd have to crunch the numbers on that and see what he'd have to average on a weekly basis. But I think as far as 3,100 yards, and that he did that in 15 games, I think that he should be well on pace to do that. I mean, that season he ran the ball 176 times as well for 1,200 yards. Just insane. So, I mean, I don't know if we'll ever see those types of numbers again, but yeah, I'm very, very curious to see. And I do agree. I know that we were going back and forth, and you were talking about the 1,000-yard receiver, and you didn't think that there would be the one this year. I do think that there's still, I think Zay Flowers could do it. I think that Odell could do it, at least, if he's able to stay healthy again. But I do think that maybe it is more likely that we get, 2 guys that have 800 yards, a guy that has 600 yards. Maybe Mark Andrews puts up 900 to 1,000 or something like that. And I think that that's the more likely path to how Lamar gets all these passing yards. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it'll be interesting to see if he does take a step back of the rushing attempts and how those scales balance out. But speaking of rushing, we'll move on to the running backs. And this was a team that was very strong with the running backs last year, right? He had Saquon Barkley and he had Josh Jacobs last year, right? He
Yep.
traded Josh Jacobs away in that
Trade him the Zets.
3-teamer, right? So
Yep.
that was, I mean, unbelievable. That was like 2 top 5 guys that really carried his team, even with Lamar getting hurt, and especially with Jalen Hurts having his MVP type season. But I feel like this running back room is taking a step back. I mean, you do have Saquon in a contract year again. He did kind of pop off. It felt like he was kind of trending way down going into last year, and then he just went crazy. So, I mean, we don't know if he has that consistency yet, if he's going to be able to put up this same season, but he is in a contract year again. And if that's how he plays in a contract year, then Simcoe, I think, can be very reliant on him. But without Jacobs, I do get a little bit worried, right? I think Dameon Pierce, he was very good last year. I think he dealt with some injuries at the end, but he's going to be in a very bad offense this year. And I think the Texans overall are going to be horrible. I think that they're going to, they might repeat as, what were they, the second, third worst team last year? They moved back to second when they won that final week, right?
Yep,
I think they're going to be just as bad. I mean, you have a defensive minded coach coming in with an offense that is like completely devoid of talent. You got Nico Collins going against Tank Dell, going against Xavier Hutchinson, going against Robert Woods for like the wide receiver 1 battle. I'm personally not a huge CJ Stroud guy. I think that this offense is going to really struggle. And I worry about how that's going to play out for Dameon Pierce this year. And I also, I mean, Simcoe, he does have Singletary. I worry that Singletary could actually vulture into those like those carries and take away some of those points. So, of course, he also has Dobbins. He has Edwards. And he has that stack with Lamar. So it's just like, who's running the ball? How are they going to do that? Is J.K. Dobbins even good? Is Gus Edwards eating into that? Are they going to vulture each other? Is Lamar going to vulture their touches? I worry about this running back room. I feel like it's getting a little bit murky. How are you feeling, especially compared to last year?
Yeah, I share the concern with the Texans, but I actually think that's going to help Dameon Pierce. I think with a rookie quarterback, they're going to feed Dameon Pierce carries. They didn't add any running backs that I'm afraid of taking carries away from him. Singletary is not that big of a threat in my mind, even in the red zone. I actually think how bad the Texans are, even though they're going to be playing from behind most of the time, is going to help Dameon Pierce. But that being said, I still don't think Dameon Pierce is a starter on this roster. Like, you probably are starting Saquon, Dobbins week to week, and then I think all 5 of his wide receivers crack the starting lineup before Dameon Pierce would in a flex spot. Maybe Dameon Pierce beats out Christian Kirk, but I don't think Dameon Pierce is a starter. So really, I'm looking at Saquon, Dobbins, Saquon top 5 guy. Dobbins projected running back 14 this year, so still in that wide running back 1 conversation. And then I think Dameon Pierce is a great running back 3. So for what he is on this roster, I like Dameon Pierce. And then kind of divesting Josh Jacobs into 2 different options. Like, this is the Bussey Boys, formerly known as Snake Bitten. So yeah, Saquon and Josh Jacobs would have been a much stronger running back room going into this year. But I do kind of like how he diversified and give himself 3 options going forward, because this team always gets riddled with injuries.
Yeah, I think what I'm really worried about, and I do agree, and Dobbins, he looked pretty good when he was coming back last year, and then what? Didn't he just like not get touches at the end of the year? He's like,
yeah, I don't think Dobbins has higher than a running back 20 season under his belt.
Yeah, and so right now too, I'm looking at Barkley's game logs from his whole career, right? So last year he played a full 16. It was the first time he did that since his rookie year, where he was the RB1. In between that, he played 13 games, he played 2 games, he played 13 games. I think just what I worry about is that in general, like, there's really not much depth. So at running back, he doesn't have much injury insurance. If Barkley were to go down, if Dameon Pierce were to go down, or even J.K. Dobbins. Yeah, Dameon Pierce missed the last 4 weeks of last season. J.K. Dobbins obviously has his injury history with that brutal knee injury that he suffered. So I think that this is kind of like a glass house of a running back room. And if they are able to stay healthy, then they're going to be perfectly consistent for Simcoe. Saquon will be able to put up the big numbers and carry him week to week. But if he does start to lose one of these guys, then I think he's really going to be struggling, because if he has to dip into that depth, he doesn't really have much. So that's what worries me. But yeah, I mean, you got to assume that they're going to stay healthy, and if they do, then they're going to be great. But moving on to wide receivers, I think this is a good room. It's a little wonky. I think it's like it looks like a redraft
It looks
wide
like a
receiver.
redraft wide receiver room. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
great
But I
call.
mean, sometimes like, and I think a lot of times that plays in Dynasty on a year-to-year thing. If you have the best redraft team, then you're probably going to win the championship, right? So he's got DK Metcalf, who we traded for in the offseason. He's got Keenan Allen. He's got Debo Samuel. He's got the old tandem of Hopkins and Thielen, and then he's got Christian Kirk. Those are the notable receivers on his team. Pete, what's your read on the wide receiver room?
Yeah, it's a little old, and it's a redraft wide receiver room. You got Debo at 27, and I think D Hop and Keenan Allen are both 29, 30. Christian Kirk is the assuming wide receiver 2 behind Ridley and Jacksonville now. And obviously just picked up DK, but he just doesn't have that prototypical wide receiver 1. Doesn't have like I'm not talking like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, but I'm talking about like AJ Brown, CD Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Cup, that kind of wide receiver 1. I've been talking about projections a lot on these divisional shows because I think it tells you, where these guys are somewhat headed. And all 5 of these guys are projected 15 to 25 for wide receivers. So he just doesn't have that like prototypical wide receiver 1. And I think that's a move I'd like to see him make. Like I'd like to see him take. I think he's got a 20. He might have 124 first and 225s, I think, or at least 323 first between 24 and 25. I like to see Simcoe take one of those picks, combine it with a Christian Kirk or a Keenan Allen or a D Hop, maybe even 2 of those wide receivers to get an elite wide receiver. So I think like the quarterback and running back room is kind of the core competency of this team, and then the wide receivers are just kind of good enough on their way out of the league, the back half of their own careers, but are going to sit in that wide receiver 15 to 25 range and get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good read on the room. I think it's very interesting. I mean, I think that DK is undervalued. I think that he's a young stud. I think he just has that. I mean, he's just huge, right? He's an athletic freak, and I think that as the Seahawks progress and things start to shake out, and as Tyler Lockett starts to get a little bit older and phase his way
Yep.
out, I think that DK and JSN can be like a lethal wide receiver duo there. And I mean, I don't think Geno Smith's going to be the guy sticking around forever. So I think that they'll be able to find a quarterback. They've had, I guess, good luck at finding that guy in the past few years. I mean, Russell Wilson was a hidden gem. He was a 3rd-round pick. They had brought in Matt Flynn to be the starter, and he won it. And then DK obviously, or not DK, Geno obviously came out of nowhere after like 7 years in the darkness. So
Yep.
I mean, they seem to find a way to find quarterbacks that can get the job done. So I think that they'll find the proper thrower of footballs for that receiver room. Keenan Allen, I think, is somebody that's interesting to talk about because he's a guy that both him and Mike Williams always seem to be hurt, but they also never seem to really miss games. Keenan Allen, he did miss pretty much the entire first half, but then I was looking at his game log and he went crazy when he played last year. He played the last 8 games of the year. So that's pretty much the halfway point, right? 9 games, 8 games. He played the last 8 games when he came back from injury. He averaged 15 points per game, 15.03. If you extrapolate that over the whole season, that would have been wide receiver 7, at least in terms of points per game. Probably a little bit higher if you were to do that for a full 17. Debo is a guy that I've talked about a bunch, and Bowen traded for him coming off the huge year. I hated that trade at the time. I still hate it looking back. I mean, my whole thing with Debo is that I feel like now that mystique is starting to kind of wear off, but he was being valued at that max value where he was the RB1 for San Francisco. He was getting starting running back carries while also playing receiver. We're never going to see that type of usage again. We've talked about it in the past when we talked about Ayuk. Is he arguably the actual wide receiver 1 in San Francisco? Debo's more of like that joker, do it all, Swiss Army knife role. But I mean, now he's not going to get those touches. I mean, you got Christian McCaffrey here. You got Elijah Mitchell. He's a great second running back to have. So Debo, I mean, I think it's fair to view him as more of that wide receiver 15 to 25. But then on the bench, I mean, Christian Kirk, he was great last year. It's year 2 of Trevor Lawrence. He's dealing with Calvin Ridley coming in. And then you got the old guys. How's Hopkins going to be in this Titans offense with Tannehill thrown to him? How's Thielen going to be? Is he going to be able to kind of be the alpha in that room for at least this year? Or is he too old? Was he really looking washed last year? So it's a redraft receiver room. I think it's interesting. And I mean, but even this, I mean, Keenan Allen, he deals with the injuries. Thielen, he seems to be getting hurt now. It's just this team. I'm not low on them, but I do worry. I just look at so many of these players and I get a little bit worried about the injury history and I'm not sure, but I mean, at max health, I mean, they can get the job done and they can go against any of these other teams. You got any other comments on the wide receivers?
Uh, I will say I've got Ayuk scoring more points than Debo this year in fantasy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he seems to be getting all the hype. They seem to really be talking about him as like the supreme pass catcher there. So I feel like he's so due to take that next step up. And I wouldn't be surprised either. Um, Beyond that, other pass catchers that they have, tight ends, it's just the room of average. These are the guys that we talk about when we
Yeah.
talk about that tight end 6 to tight end 20, Juwan Johnson, Dawson Knox, and Chig. I don't think there's really much to say about that. I think, any one of them can maybe emerge as like the tight end 5 this year. I think that they're all capable of that. But I mean, besides that, I think that they're just going to be putting up that average 5 to 7 points a game that we see from tight ends.
Yeah, I know personally Simcoe just doesn't believe in the tight end position. I maybe he'll add one going down the stretch, but he really just doesn't believe in it as a philosophy standpoint. And Jawan Johnson, wide receiver or tight end 10 last year. Sneaky tight end 10, Jawan Johnson last year. So he's gonna stream him. I think maybe Tyler Conklin gets a start. Chig and Jawan probably the majority of the time, but he's gonna stream him. He doesn't believe in them. For the tight end, dead zone that we've been talking about the last couple shows.
Yep. All right. Next team, second place. This is the team I'm looking forward to talking about. I think this is the team that, I feel like people were really rooting for them last year. They blew it. And I feel like, it's all the goodwill is gone, right? I mean, people really wanted Big Brain to just get that monkey off their back, finally win that championship, finally win a playoff game, not just win a championship, just advance in the playoffs. They were unable to do so for a third straight year. They have no playoff wins. Now it's just like pathetic. Now it's like, okay, you had your chance last year. I don't want to talk about it. This is a team now. I feel like they've taken a massive step back. And before we get into it, because we always start with the quarterbacks, I just want to propose my theory, right? So they traded me Rodgers, and then I outbid them for Kyler Murray using Aaron Rodgers. Okay. I was very tapped into what they were offering. They were offering the running backs, they were offering Kenny Pickett, they were offering some bullshit picks. Igor, he wanted a win now quarterback. I gave them the win now quarterback. They had the win now quarterback. They gave it to me. They traded Rodgers away. So this is my theory. I think that they traded Rodgers away thinking that they had 3 or 4 possible deals just like in the bag. I know that they were looking at Dak Prescott. I know that they were looking at Kyler Murray, like we were talking about. I think that they thought they'd have an easier time getting this quarterback and that they could use this running back depth. They could throw in one of their receivers. They could use some of these picks, or they could throw in a guy like Kenny Pickett, who I don't think a lot of people find to be too exciting. But they did that because they thought that they'd be able to get the guy. They haven't been able to do it. And now I feel like they're going to suffer this season for it. I think that they're still going to be competitive as a wild card team, especially with those running backs, especially with those wide receivers. And I think that the quarterbacks can be okay. I don't think that those are championship winning quarterbacks, but what's your read? I mean, we all know that you're very tapped in with Big Brain LLC. Some are calling you the 4th owner. So could you maybe serve as their mouthpiece once more and just tell me what's going on with Big Brain?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a proponent of Big Brain every single year. I feel like when it gets down to the playoff time, I always pick them as the team to win it, and they continue to disappoint every single year with a first round playoff exit. So, I mean, you kind of touched on the positions, but I can't, I have the least amount of faith in Big Brain I ever have at this moment in time.
I agree. I mean, I'm looking at their quarterback room right now, right? So they got Jordan Love, who I'm personally a believer. I don't know how that's more of a real life believer. I still don't know how that translates into fantasy production, right? I mean, he seems to, he's one of those guys. I've talked about it before. He's not a rushing quarterback. He's a quarterback that can run. So he's a guy that can go out and maybe get you 20, 30 yards on a good night, with his feet. So that's 2 to 3 points. That's great. He seems to have the arm that's able to absolutely sling it. I do think that when it comes to the Packers, that's a team I'm high on this year. I think that if Jordan Love can just be okay, if he could just be an average quarterback, I think the Packers can have a good year. Of course, average doesn't translate for a good fantasy season, but I do think that he can be somebody that develops long term. The Packers are an institution. I believe in them to continue to develop their guys. They went from Favre to Rodgers and now Love. I'll believe it when I see it that they don't have a good quarterback, right? But then beyond that, they have Kenny Pickett, who I think could be a winning quarterback in real life. I don't know if he's going to be able to be a big fantasy point scorer. And then you got the older guys, Jimmy G and Ryan Tannehill, who, those are QB3, QB4s on a team. But I mean, they went from having Aaron Rodgers putting up back-to-back MVP seasons. Obviously, he took a step back last year. Seemed like Big Brain took a little bit of a step back as well. And
And
yeah,
Brock Purdy.
I'm worried about this QB room. I mean, how are I mean, do you have any more thoughts? Like, how are you
Yeah,
feeling?
yeah. Like they ended last year with Aaron Rodgers and Brock Purdy.
Yeah,
That quarterback room
I
going
forgot
into
about
this
that.
year.
They
Yeah,
came up on Brock Purdy and they blew it.
yeah. And like I've in a dynasty league to trade your starting quarterback one and quarterback two in an offseason together, that just feels crazy to me. Like crazy to me. And that's why I don't have confidence in this team. I'm not a love guy. I do think this is basically his rookie year. Um, in terms of developing relationships with all the new wide receivers. Watson and Dubs are only sophomores this year. He's the first year at the helm, so I don't expect much. And then same thing with Pickett. Like I do expect him to take that second year jump that we see rookie quarterbacks take with the same system. But I'll go to the projections and Love's projected QB 20, Pickett 22, and Tannehill 28. Like this quarterback room is garbage. Garbage. And coming from Aaron Rodgers and Brock Purdy, like I'm looking at their team from last year. I went to the matchup that they lost in the playoffs. They got Aaron Rodgers, Brock Purdy. And this year, they traded Aaron Rodgers, Brock Purdy. They didn't add any starter to this roster. They didn't add a starter, right? So they traded their first and second quarterback, but they're still starting the same running backs, the same wide receivers, and the same tight ends. So this starting roster undeniably got worse, which is why I just don't have the confidence in Big Brain this year as I did in years past. The real question to me is can this elite running back, absolute workhorse of a stable, make up for the bad quarterback play? Because I'll go back to projections. You got CMC projected RB1, Austin Eckler projected RB2, Nick Chubb projected RB3, and Joe Mixon RB12. So it's can this elite running back room make up for the bad quarterback play?
Yeah, and they also got AJ Dillon and James Conner on the bench as well. So I mean, they're
Yeah.
rarely going to have to dip into that. I don't know how the bye weeks line up, but they're really never going to have to worry about that. But I mean, God forbid if one of these guys does go down by injury, two of these
And
guys,
that's
whatever.
why I think the trades were so crazy because you're trading your QB1, your QB2 for two running backs depths and AJ Dillon and James Conner, who aren't even going to see the starting lineup.
That are, ideally, they will like pretty much never play for them.
Yeah, so it just the trades they made this offseason doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not seeing where Big Brain is headed this year.
Yeah, exactly. And as we started off talking about, the two quarterback thing, that has seemed to be the way to win. You need to have two strong quarterbacks. They had that opportunity, of course. Rodgers was getting older. Maybe they wanted to get out ahead of it, be a year early, and make sure you could still get value instead of being stuck with a guy like Tom Brady. And then I guess they were worried about Brock Purdy's elbow, but I mean he's back. He's expected to start week 1. I mean it's still to be seen if his elbow is going to hold up, if it was just beginner's luck from him, or if the league's going to catch up to him. But I mean Brock Purdy was putting up insane numbers, so it's like they just gave up a huge source of points for a bunch of guys that projected just be pretty much by definition mid. So yeah, I mean looking at these running backs, they're so strong. I mean McCaffrey's obviously a beast. Eckler was the reigning RB1. Nick Chubb is just so good. And Mixon, I mean, I think Mixon sucks, but he's going to have so much volume that he's going to have to like almost be a top 15 like running back by default. So
Right.
I mean, they're stacked at this. One thing I did say about Eckler being RB1, I remember reading something about the reigning RB1 and how they follow up in the next season. So I couldn't find the article or the tweets or the Reddit post, or because I don't even remember where I read it. But it was something about how there really hasn't been a back-to-back RB1 in over 10 years. And I think that at the time that post was even a couple years old. So we're looking at like, over a decade. And I did my own research. Turns out it doesn't apply to PPR and half PPR. I believe that is the case in standard scoring, though. I do think it's been over a decade without a repeat RB1. I did not fact check that, but I do remember reading it. But I did do my own research when it comes to the reigning RB1. So I went online. I took a look at the last 10 RB1s going back to 2013. So I'll read it in order because I think it's pretty interesting just to hear some of the names. So starting in 2013, you got Jamal Charles, then Le'Veon Bell, then Devontae Freeman, David Johnson. Then you go back to back with Todd Gurley in 2017 and 2018, followed by McCaffrey in 19, Kamara in 20, Jonathan Taylor in 21, and then Eckler last year. So I crunched some numbers, right? Because I wanted to see, okay, were they following up, and were they still able to put up strong performances? Because if you go from RB1 to RB6, is that really a big deal? Like, no, you can't expect the guy to be the best running back 2 years in a row. That's just like ridiculous, right? And a lot of times it's only like a matter of like 15 points or something.
Right,
But
right.
I did find it interesting because we saw quite a drop off from most of these guys, right? So Jamal Charles, he finished RB7 the next year, but his points per game production went down by 7.5 points. Le'Veon Bell finished as RB8, and that's because he played in 6 games. He still put up 16.5 points a game, but that was 4.1 points less than the previous year as RB1. Devontae Freeman finished as RB6. He had a drop in 2.6 points. David Johnson played 1 game the following year, finished as RB 118, scored 10 points that game. That's a 56.52% drop. Todd Gurley went back to back, right? He finished as RB 14 the next year. But he went from, so when he went back to back as RB1, he actually went up by 1.1 points per game. But then the next year, when he went from RB1 to RB14, he went from 24.5 points per game to 13.6. That is a 10.9 point drop. That's 44.49%. And then, of course, we really haven't heard from Todd Gurley since. McCaffrey followed up his RB1 season as RB53. He played in 3 games that year. He still put up monster numbers. He was actually putting up 27.3 points per game in those 3 games that he played. And then you had Kamara go RB8. He dropped 6.2 points. And then Jonathan Taylor, of course, played 11 games last year. And he dropped from 20.8 points per game to 11 points. That's 47.12%. So overall, the average in those 10 years was a 5.36 point drop, and that's 24.25%. So we're seeing these running backs follow up their RB1 season with losing nearly a quarter of their points. So Big Brain, they're relying on Austin Eckler to go back to back there. Austin Eckler, of course, has been dealing with the contract issues in Los Angeles. There was the weird kind of trade request that just turned into nothing. Christian McCaffrey, though, so we're talking about Eckler possibly losing points just based off of history. McCaffrey, San Francisco has talked about wanting to limit his workload a little bit, just because they want to avoid losing him to injury like pretty much every season of his career is gone. And then, like I said, I think Mixon stinks, and Chubb, he's good, but I think that Cleveland's going to start tailoring that offense to Deshaun Watson, pass it a lot more too. So I do worry, about this running back room holding up. I don't know if the volume is going to be as reliant as it has been in years past. I don't know. Hopefully they can still remain efficient, but I don't know if they're going to get enough touches there. You were talking about how their team success kind of comes down to that. You're looking into the crystal ball. How do you feel about this running back room?
It's a wagon. The running back room is a wagon. I also think it's interesting pulling from that like running back one history. I mean, we're talking about guys like Todd Gurley, Devonta Smith, Jamal Charles, who are not even in the league anymore. And then you got Alvin Kamara, who's going to sit 3 games this year. Jonathan Taylor, who's going to sit 4 games this year. It just shows you the volatility at running back that we see. I feel like almost every other team in the league is kind of on to this new wave of like quarterbacks, wide receivers. And Big Brain's making the money off the running backs that people aren't really going for. So I think it also speaks to the Big Brain's future. Like, they are very old at running back, but they're very good at running back. And it's not like they have the youth at wide receiver either, where like they have youth in other places. So this is a very old team in general. I'd be willing to wager it probably is the oldest team in the league. Off the top of my head, it's just a guess, but overall, this should be the top running back room in the league, and it's going to carry them throughout the season. I still have them as a playoff team, just not winning the division. I got them still in that big 4 that we've been looking at the last 2 years of Vibers, 2 Pins, Simcoe, and Big Brain. But they're at the bottom end of that big 4, and they're on their way out. They got 1 foot out the door. I still have them as a playoff team getting the wild card.
I agree. I don't think that we've seen a team take that step up and kind of take the crown from them as far as being in that big 4. But I agree with that take that they're trending down. They're on their way out. They got to switch something up. I mean, right now I feel like would be kind of the prime time. I mean, maybe they can feel it out with their quarterbacks at first, but if Pickett and Love aren't able to deliver, then maybe it's time to start selling at least one of these running backs, right? Just try and get more. I mean, they have a bunch of first round picks. The thing is, I mean, they can try and use that to maybe load up at receiver or something. I don't think that they're going to be able to use that draft capital to get quarterback. I mean, we've talked about it before. You pretty much can't trade for a quarterback in today's league. It's just not going to happen. I think everybody knows that that's the way to win right now. Big Brain, they're going to have to try and wait, I guess, and wait for somebody to zag and the like I said, the league meta to kind of change up, and maybe they'll be able to buy a quarterback. But right now, that's like the hardest thing to come across when you're on the market. So they can try and do that to maybe get some like insane young talent at receiver. They do have like 5 first-round picks over the next couple of years.
Yep, they do.
So they have the draft capital to make moves. I just don't know if I just don't know if it's a move that can actually help them win, because they need a quarterback. They need at least one quarterback, but I think they need 2 quarterbacks. And if they can't get it, I just don't think it's going to matter. So they can maybe start selling these guys off and working on more pieces for the future, just to try and get younger. And maybe they can just kind of rebuild as they go instead of trying to do it all through the draft. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see. And I do worry about the running back room holding up. Like you said, I mean, it's a wagon, and you just have to assume that they're going to be healthy and they're going to all get those points that we expect them to get. But I mean, if this running back room is going to take any type of step back, then their team's going to be hurting bad. It's going to be
And they're
hurting
not.
very bad.
I have it on very good authority. They're not looking to sell these running backs anytime soon. They were offered a 24 first and a 25 first for Chubb last week, and they scoffed at it, said it was a ridiculously low offer. 2 firsts for Chubb, who's only got 2 years left on his contract and probably not getting a third contract as a starting running back anywhere. I think that's a good deal. I'll put the Zits on blast too. They were offering DJ Moore in a first, George Pickens in a first, and obviously I was a part of a trade that offered them 2 firsts, all for Chubb, and did not even sniff at it. So they probably feel good about their 5 firsts, and they probably think they can recoup their age. But they take a step back from last year. I'm not big on Big Brain, but real quick, what do you think about their wide receivers and tight ends?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that they're going to use those first. Like I said, I don't think they're going to be able to get quarterbacks. They could definitely try and use it to address the wide receiver issue that they have. I mean, Devontae Adams, he's a stud until proven otherwise. Jimmy Garoppolo, I know people are low on him, but I mean, he's been a winning quarterback. He's been able to run very successful fantasy offenses and supply the ball to a lot of top end fantasy players. So I don't think there's any reason to expect him. And teammates seem to love Jimmy Garoppolo. So I don't think there's any reason to expect Devontae Adams to take a step back unless he really doesn't want to play in LA or Las Vegas and forces his way out. But if he does that, then he probably ends up in a better situation. So, I have no reason to be down on Devontae Adams this year. Amari Cooper, I think, also is going to have a good season. He was very good last year, and I mean, I think a lot of it was with Jacoby Brissett actually. But he's got another offseason with Deshaun Watson under his belt. Like I think we both agree that the Browns are going to start passing more, so I think it's going to be good for him. But then beyond that, I mean, we're talking about Michael Thomas, who is just, you can't rely on him anymore. Jacoby Myers, who is just a very average receiver. What's that? Oh, slant boy.
Slant boy.
Yep. And then after that, you got what? KJ Osborne, who maybe he can, be productive in, Minnesota running all these 3 wide receiver sets. But they have just no wide receiver depth. I mean, even like their 3rd receiver just is like barely worth playing. So that is definitely a position of need for them. How are you feeling about this top 2 options, and then kind of what lies beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, Devontae wide receiver 3 last year. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is like too much of a step down from Derek Carr. So I still expect Devontae to be that dude, top 5 guy. And Amari Cooper wide receiver 9 last year. I feel like Amari Cooper just does not get the hype as a top 10 wide receiver that everyone else does in the top 10. But I love everyone in the Browns offense here and think they're only going to take a step up. So if Cooper was wide receiver 3 last year, or wide receiver 9, I expect him to even do better than that. So I love those 2 guys. They're old. I love those 2 guys. And then Goddard, I've talked about this tight end, I got to come up with a name for this tight end zone of tight end 2 to tight end 10, all separated between 15 projected points or something like that. I said multiple times in every show. Goddard is in the upper echelon of that tight end zone, but I do think he's capped in Philly with AJ Brown and Devonta Smith being the 2 primary pass catchers there. And you even got DeAndre Swift going to get some screen passes and stuff like that too. So Goddard is in the upper echelon of that tight end zone, but he's still in the 140, 150 point range. Only 10, 20 points above the other tight ends down 10 and 10. So I don't think it's a huge gap or a huge difference. So overall, I'd say these 3 players stay injury. They hold it down. They let that running back room shine. Big Brain's going to have another good year, but on their way out.
Yeah, I think they'll, relative to the rest of the league, they'll have a good season. I think when you compare year by year, and I think that maybe that's something I'll look into. Maybe I'll drop it in the chat tomorrow or something. I think year by year they're just going to continue to regress with their points scored, and that was always our prediction for them and McMorrow's team
Yeah.
as well, right? They put up those huge points because they drafted kind of better redraft teams when we had our startup draft. But as a lot of these younger teams in our league started to grow up and mature and grow into their roles, we've all started to catch up a bit, and they've started to take a step back with age as well. So yeah, I mean, I think Goddard, he's a great tight end. You know, I think that he is like one of those, like, you know, that tight end 4, 5, 6 type of guy. He does have
Yep.
that, you know, maybe top 3 upside. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's too much more to say. So we can move on to Wallace.
Let's talk about I want to touch on my trade with Big Brain real quick.
Oh, yeah. I did want to talk about that. I mean, we don't have to get too deep into it. I mean, I
Yeah.
know you were saying that you just saw they had a spot on their taxi squad and then you just made the offer and they ended up doing it. But I mean, what the hell are they thinking? I mean, we're trading for backup quarterbacks like that. I mean, it's not like Jordan Love has any type of like injury concerns or anything like that. You don't need the insurance for him. I mean, if he doesn't work out, I don't think that Sean Clifford's the guy. I think it's just like with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi last year. It's why I just kept refusing to trade for Zappi whenever you offered it to me. You could have offered
Yeah.
it to me for one fab, and I probably would have said no because it just wasn't any point, right? If Mac Jones didn't work out, then the Pats are going to go out and get a different quarterback. It's the same thing with Green Bay. Sean Clifford is never going to play a meaningful snap for Green Bay. It is not worth the time, the energy, the price to pay up for him. So I just had to get that off my chest. If you have anything to pile on with, feel free. But yeah, I mean, I didn't want to spend too much time on it. I just needed to say, Big Brain, what the hell are you doing? I think overall, I think the segment on Big Brain has been, we don't know what they're doing, and we don't think that they quite know what they're doing either.
Yeah, I'll make it super quick because it's such a small minor trade, but I do think that there's an underlying narrative here. So super small trade, right? But Big Brain missed on this. They completely missed on this. If you're in tune with the league, you know that everyone's got to make 2 or 3 roster cuts this week to have the because we took away those 3 offseason bench spots. John Clifford, on my end, he was getting dropped tomorrow morning. He's getting dropped Thursday morning. I'm sliding another rookie into my taxi squad spot. So why not try to get something of value, even if it's like a late third, whenever. I go to Big Brain's roster. I think, oh, Sean Clifford, he won the backup job in Green Bay. Probably has a little bit of value to whoever owns Love. Big Brain owns Love. Check out their roster. Oh, they got a taxi spot open. Let's just throw it out there. They accepted immediately. No discussion whatsoever. But just let me tell you this. If you don't know this by now, Pete will tell you. Taxi squads were added this offseason, right? As soon as we have our rookie draft, you should fill your taxi squad immediately on the next waiver cycle after the rookie draft, because why the hell not? You and I have both made a killing off picking up these rookies that don't go drafted, become some type of value, and then sneak a second or third here and there. Sometimes I've even gotten a first round pick from these guys. So like if you got to fill your taxi squad spot right after the rookie draft. Those guys could turn into something, and you might find an idiot like Big Brain who just accepts an offer for Sean Clifford out of nowhere. So, sure, it's a 3rd round pick. It's Sean Clifford. Probably not going to be mattering at all. But I do think it shows you that LLC is not as in tuned with the more savvy moves of a dynasty manager and doesn't have that long-term vision, because they couldn't see that they could have picked up Sean Clifford for $1 tomorrow morning.
Exactly. And I think we've said everything that needs to be said. Big Brain, they're old news, they're outdated. They got to catch up. I mean, we're doing everything on the computer and they got a filing cabinet. That's pretty much how Big Brain runs. So
yeah.
All right, moving on. We got Wallace's team. I'll be honest. Whatever. I don't have too much to say on. I mean, his team just is what it is, right? I mean, I feel like there isn't too much to say. He's got Trevor Lawrence, a quarterback. Of course, that is like a top, I don't know, 7 dynasty quarterback right now, right?
I got him at 8.
I guess one guy that we could talk about, because he doesn't have much beyond this at quarterback, but he has CJ Stroud, right? That was the guy that he traded up to get. We've already talked about that trade before. Didn't have to make it. You could have just let CJ Stroud fall into his lap and kept Kadarius Toney. But I mean, whatever, it is what it is. He went up and he got his guy. I'm not a Stroud guy. I mean, I was banging that drum all last year. Especially when I was riding my future for Hendon Hooker. I just kept saying I did not think that Stroud was playing at a Heisman level. I thought that he was insanely overrated. I thought that I felt like he's really benefited, and people keep saying you can't helmet scout, you can't just assume a quarterback's going to be bad because he went to Ohio State. I mean, how many more times are we going to see it? These guys put up insane college numbers as quarterbacks, and it doesn't matter if they're a first round pick or a fifth round pick. It's the same thing. Just some of them just don't test as well. Some of them don't have the same pedigree. But Stroud is just another one of those guys. I mean, he's throwing to these like 20-yard windows. It's like impossible to miss some of these guys. And like we keep talking about, oh my God, all Ohio State does is pump out elite wide receivers. Okay, maybe that's the source of the problem with evaluating these quarterbacks. They're throwing to guys that step into the league and are immediate studs. So it's like, of course, they're going to have that help. So I worry about Stroud, especially in a bad offense like that. It's not like he's working with an offensive genius or anything in Houston. So, I don't think that Stroud's going to be able to contribute for him right away this year when it comes to wanting to be a winning fantasy football team, right? He's going to be a 12 to 15 point per game guy. That's just not going to cut it. And then they just don't have the quarterback depth either. I mean, Minshew and Mills, those are both backups. And then Josh Dobbs, we can talk about that Cardinals quarterback situation now, I guess, but he has been named the starter. We can, just talk about Dobbs. At least we can do Tune in a little bit, but he's a starter for now. But I mean, I didn't even make a bid on him, even when I had Clayton Tune and I knew that it was up in the air. I just didn't think it was worth it, right? I mean, and I would have had to bid, I think, 30 fab to get him. I only have 35 left right now. I've been active on the waiver market all off season. I just didn't think it was worth it. I mean, Josh Dobbs, he's a guy he's going to be putting up 10 to 12 points a game. I can just trust my flex guy. Right now, I have Elijah Moore starting in the flex. If Elijah Moore scores a touchdown on week 1, he's probably going to outscore Josh Dobbs in week 1. So I'm not too worried about that. You got a bad offense in Arizona. They're going to struggle. So even if Clayton Tune gets to start, I wouldn't rely on him to put up crazy points. So that's just like what I worry about with them. But I mean, when it comes to Wallace's quarterback room, it's just not great. I don't know where Pete went. I don't know what. Oh God, his laptop just died. All right, so we're going to be waiting for Slippery Pete. I'm going to take a quick pause break while we wait for him to get back on. All right, we're back. Pete's laptop died. He is back on the grid. Anyways, as I was saying, I'm personally not a huge Stroud guy. I don't trust him to really translate over to the NFL. I don't think that he's an offense that will generate a lot of points in general this year, and rookie quarterbacks typically seem to struggle. So I don't think that Wallace has that second quarterback needed to really be an effective team in this league right now. So I think the season it's still going to be, kind of middle of the road just because of his quarterback play. Like I was saying with Dobbs, I wasn't too interested in picking him up. I didn't want to spend the fab that I felt was necessary to get him. Even now, I'm not feeling too much urgency to trade for him as the holder of Kyler Murray and Clayton Tune. It just is what it is, right? I mean, if my season comes down to Josh Dobbs because I have to compete, much like some people are saying about Simcoe's season coming down to Gardner Minshew, but that's something that we should have covered earlier if I really wanted to talk about it. But yeah, I mean, how are you feeling about Wallace's quarterbacks? Of course, Trevor Lawrence, that kind of goes without saying, but I guess Stroud is really the guy I'm asking about here.
Yeah, I was low on Stroud as a prospect, and I'm even lower on him as an NFL starter. He had the worst landing spot, in my opinion, of all the rookie quarterbacks. You look at Lawrence, Nick's other quarterback, and how much he benefited from having a head coach like Doug Peterson to develop him. And Stroud just doesn't have that. He's got D'Amico Ryans, DC from San Francisco, who has no experience developing rookie quarterbacks and defensive minded. And then you got an offensive coordinator, because I was interested. I looked it up. His name is Bobby Slowick. He was an assistant coach in San Fran. So
sounds like a loser.
Sounds like a loser. Maybe he's got some Shanahan juice rubbed off on him, but I don't see anyone in this coaching staff who can develop Stroud to be that guy. And I didn't like him as a prospect. So I'm low on Stroud, and I'm even lower on him as an NFL starter. Not only that, but the Texans traded their first round pick next year to Arizona to get Stroud. It's not like they're going to be adding a Marvin Harrison Jr. or an elite offensive tackle to protect him. So Stroud could be looking at 2-3 year development instead of like a sophomore jump that we see most rookie quarterbacks take. So I'm low on Stroud. I agree with you for all the points that you said. What I do think is a definite story about this team is the running back room. The offseason was an absolute kick in the nuts to this running back room. You look at the end of last year, they've got Breece Hall. Nick's got Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker. I mean, those are 2 top 5 dynasty running backs at the end of last year, you'd think, right? But then the Jets go out and they sign Dalvin Cook, and Seattle drafts Charbonnet in third round maybe. pretty high draft capital on him. So
Second round, he had essentially the same draft capital as Kenneth Walker.
right, and you've got him, so you know about Charbonnet more than me. But the offseason was a kick in the nuts to this running back room. So what do you think about the running backs?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, Brees Hall this year, it's going to be tough to expect too much out of him, anyways, because he is coming back from an ACL injury. I think we were talking about it last week, or maybe it was when we were doing the Dalvin Cook stuff with McMorrow. But I was looking into his injury, and I saw a sports doctor gave an opinion on a long touchdown that he had in practice, where he was saying, well, and you know better than anybody with the ACLs, it's not the straightaway speed that you lose. You can still do all that. It's the side to side, so it's like we still haven't really seen him cut. They did bring in Dalvin. They paid him pretty significantly for a 1-year deal. So they're going to be expecting to use him. I mean, the Jets, they have Super Bowl aspirations. They're not going to be, tailoring to somebody's fantasy team. They want to play the guy that gives the best chance to win. If Brees Hall isn't able to do that on a consistent basis, they're going to lean on Dalvin Cook. And, even maybe my guy, Izzy Abanaconda, we'll talk about him in a little bit. I'm looking forward to it. But, and then Kenneth Walker too. I mean, Charbonnet was my RB2 pre-draft. I'm not too high on Jahmyr Gibbs. Of course, that shifted just with the draft capital and all that. But obviously, I was still plenty high on Charbs. I mean, I took him in the first round. So I do worry about Ken Walker because the thing is, Charbonnet I had him ranked as RB2 because I felt like he was the most pro-ready. I mean, Bijan obviously is like a one in every 5 years prototype prospect, but Charbs is just built like Charbonnet is just built like he gets like the DeMarco Murray comparison. He's just built like a big NFL workhorse running back. So I really wanted Charbonnet to go to like Cincinnati and possibly take away that role from Joe Mixon. But of course he goes to Seattle. And at first I was like, ooh, I don't know if I like that. But then I was thinking about it. And Pete Carroll, he wants to pound the rock. He wants to have running back depth because they've dealt with a lot of injuries in the running back room. Ken Walker was dealing with injuries last year. So the thing that I worry about with Walker, though, is that I feel like Charbonnet is the guy that you want to have pound the rock. If you got to run some clock, if you got to establish the run, that's who you hand the ball to. Ken Walker's a home run hitter. So he could still, I mean, he's a guy that still just needs, one touch to break loose and he can give you 12 points on a 60-yard touchdown. But I think that Charbonnet is going to be the guy that gets the more consistent opportunities, and Ken Walker becomes maybe a little less reliable week to week than he was last year. But even beyond those two, I think a guy like Pacheco is interesting to talk about when you want to talk about a split backfield, because I'm a McKinnon guy. I mean, if you look at McKinnon's game log last year, he got insane receiving work, and they like to throw a lot by the goal line. I think McKinnon could steal a lot of touches because they can put him in there, make you think maybe they're going to pass it, maybe they run it with him, maybe they throw it to him, maybe they just throw it to somebody else. But I don't know. I worry about Pacheco. We see it all the time with these undrafted guys. We see it with James Robinson. I think Philip Lindsay would be a great comparison for Pacheco, a small guy, undrafted, runs hard. Lindsay was 1,000-yard rusher in year one. I think he ran for 1,000 yards again in year two. And then he just fell off and we never heard from him again. I mean, so Pacheco, if he goes by that timeline, he could still have a very solid sophomore season, but I feel like his days are numbered. We just see it all the time. It's a risky game getting in there with undrafted free agents at running back. So I worry about him as well. And then another guy I want to highlight before passing it back to you is Sean Tucker. I mean, that was my pre-draft RB6. Yep. He dropped out of the draft because of heart condition stuff. I regret not being able to get him on waivers because he is a guy that you want to take that risk on. He is like the ideal guy to spend for undrafted free agents in Dynasty because he didn't drop out because of attitude issues. He didn't drop out because of skill issues. He dropped out because people were worried about his heart. If that heart issue ends up not being a big deal, and maybe it shows itself again in a few years or something, we never know. But if it's not, then he goes right back to being that, and he gets insane value. Instead of having to use a second or a third rounder on him, you could get him for 25 or something. So I wish I could have got him. I was high on him pre-draft. He's a freak athlete. He runs very fast, track runner. But this whole running back room, every running back that Wallace is relying on is in some type of split backfield, and that worries me as well.
Yeah, completely agree.
But then, he's got the receivers too, and the receivers very interesting. I mean, it's extremely, elite at the top with Hill and Waddle. You don't really have to worry about them carving into each other's workload. They're going to pass a ton of Miami. We saw it last year. They're both capable of being wide receiver ones for a fantasy team. He has them both. That's great. Ridley, he's an unknown. Dotson's a young stud, and then he's got guys Sky Moore, Romeo Doubs, Nico Collins, who opportunity knocks for them, and then he's even got an old veteran like Odell. I mean, this is a very deep wide receiver room. Beyond Hill and Waddle, I don't know who exactly he can rely on right now. But I mean, Ridley could be fantastic in that offense. Jahan Dotson has shown a knack for finding the end zone. And then, like I said, with those other guys, opportunity knocks for him. If Sky Moore, Romeo Dobbs, Nico Collins, if just one of them can emerge, that gives Wallace some good wide receiver depth. How are you feeling? I know you've talked about Waddle a lot before. I know that I don't know how you feel about Hill, but I would assume you feel pretty high on him. He's a great receiver. How are you feeling about this receiver room? And I mean, maybe more so like the guys like Ridley and Dotson.
Yeah, I want to talk about two guys, like Waddle and DK, or Waddle and Ridley is what I want to talk about. Reek and Waddle, you said it. They're both top 10 wide receivers this year, in my opinion. Waddle, 24 wide receiver, or 24-year-old wide receiver, rookie year wide receiver 13, last year wide receiver 8. Now he's going to his third year. Waddle's a stud, absolute stud. I traded him to Wallace for Bryce Young. I've been trying to get Waddle back for the last 8 months. I've probably sent Nick about, I don't know, roughly 30 to 40 offers. I just want to highlight two that he said no to. The first offer that I couldn't believe he said no to was a 24 first LLC, 25 first McMurrow, 25 first Slow Stroke Kings. 3 firsts for Jalen Waddle. He said no. Yesterday, I had an offer on Nick's desk, accepted 2 out of 3 teams. Brandon Ayuk, 24 first LLC, 25 first Slow Stroke Kings. And he said no. I could not believe he turned that down. Brandon Ayuk scored 30 less points than Jalen Waddle last year. And then you get 2 firsts on top of that, and he turned it down. So it shows you just how high Nick is on Waddle. He's got him and Tyreek. Those are the top 2 guys. I just wanted to highlight that Nick said no to that because it's been driving me crazy. And then also, he's got Ridley as a result of the DK trade. So he traded DK for Ridley and OBJ. I think I have become lower and lower on this move for Nick than since it happened. And I think it's kind of similar to my situation with JT. I'm gonna say it at the end of when we get done with Nick's team, but this team is still 1 year away and a big step by CJ Stroud. They're 1 year away from the playoffs, from being competitive, making the playoffs. That's assuming CJ Stroud takes a big step, which I don't think is going to happen. When you know you're 1 year away, why trade DK for a guy like Ridley? DK's floor, I feel like, is a lot more secure with his age and what he's going to put up than Calvin Ridley. Sure, Calvin Ridley's ceiling is higher this year than DK, I think. But when you're 1 year away, that makes Calvin Ridley 29 next year, uncertain this year. Sure, high ceiling, but I think DK has a more safe floor. And I compare it to the Jonathan Taylor trade because looking back on it, I'm still 1 year away too. Why did I go after a Jonathan Taylor type running back in February when this kind of shit could happen as we're seeing it happen right now? So I look at both those trades. I think they're very comparable. I personally am very high on Ridley this year. I do think he's going to be a wide receiver 1. But I think DK had a lot more security, and he could have done better next year, or at least got more information on the situation next year because the team is still 1 year away.
Yeah, and I think the thing with DK is that, I mean, I'd argue that DK has a better fantasy resume than Calvin Ridley does, and he's younger. He's like a few years younger. It was. I mean, that was a trade I was hating on when it happened, and I still hate on it today. What did he? He got like Ridley and Odell, and then like I don't know what the fuck else he got. But yeah, I just didn't think it was worth it. I think that he was good enough at receiver. I mean, he already had Dotson too. If he had Hill, Waddle, DK, Dotson, and then like I don't know, like those other guys, Moore, and then Nico
Moore, like Collins, that's a great watch.
It's like whatever. I mean, like that's like plenty of depth, and I felt like he was good enough. I don't know why he felt like he needed to do it. I don't even know if that's like even if he was like a win now team, I don't even know if that's really a trade that he has to make. I don't know if Ridley takes him over the top because, like I said, I feel like DK arguably has the better resume. I mean, Ridley had that really good wide receiver 1 season where he was a top guy, but beyond that, we haven't really seen it from him. So, right. I think I still trust DK more instead of Ridley coming off of a full season off where he's sneaky old. I thought it was a strange move, but I mean, of course, he does have that Lawrence Ridley stack. So if Ridley does emerge as like a top 12 guy, then maybe that could be a big league winner for him. So the other pass catchers they got, their tight ends, they got Hawkinson, they got Evan Ingram. I mean, those are 2 of those other guys that are in that conversation. They're maybe not the top 4. Maybe they are. They're right on that fringe. I did think Hawkinson's a bit overrated. He just got that huge contract. He did finish his tight end 2 last year, but he was carried by 2 massive games. He had like 2 games over 30 points. Besides that, he had mostly single-digit points. So I think Hawkinson's a bit overrated. I think that replacing Addison with replacing Thielen with Addison is going to maybe shift some of those targets back to the wide receivers. Especially with KJ Osborne taking a step up, all these 3 wide receiver sets. I don't think that Hawkins is going to be able to repeat as tight end too. I do think that Ingram is still good, and I think he's the better tight end in this room, the one that I'd rather be starting on a weekly basis. Tight ends seem to do pretty well with Doug Peterson. He put up like 700 yards, had like 6 or 7 touchdowns last year. That's all stuff that he can continue to do. He can continue to be a red zone threat for them. I think the touchdowns are going to stick on a year-to-year thing. He did just get the tag, I believe, or maybe he got that extension he was looking for. But either way, he got paid. He's looking for more money. He's hungry. He's going to go out there. So Ingram is the better option there. I do think Hawkins is overrated. I really just wanted to get that take off. I don't know if you have any other opinions on the tight end room.
Nothing on the tight end room. I would just say overall, I think Wallace is still 1 year away. When you look at the landscape of Friends Who Gamble as a whole, the playoff teams have been pretty consistent the last couple of years, but I think you see teams like Big Brain and McMorrow stepping out of the competitive window in the next 2-3 years. And I do really like Nick's team. I do think he steps into the playoff picture next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really going to come down to Stroud and how quickly he develops and if he can take that step. But I mean, I do think that Wallace, I'm trying to pull up right now. Let's see. I'm trying to look at his draft capital as well. But I mean,
I think he's got a 24 first, like 3 24 seconds and 2 25 firsts.
Yeah, so he might be able to figure something out. And I mean, I think if he can find that answer at QB2, and I mean, he does need a bench quarterback as well. I mean, we've talked about it. I feel like we go back and forth on how we feel about a QB3, but yeah, I mean, you do need a guy that you can start on bye weeks regardless. Like he right now, he doesn't really have that. Josh Dobbs, like I said, I don't even know if he's going to be the starting or if he's going to be starting quarterback for the second half of the week 1 Cardinals game. So yeah, he does need to at least find somebody just in case Stroud, because I mean, what if Stroud stinks? He does need a third quarterback regardless. So once he figures that out, I do think that his team will take that big step. But even now, those receivers are so good. I think even with the split backfield issues, I think the running backs are still going to be fine and good enough to carry him. So yeah, I mean, that's a team that, like you said, is a year or two away. Moving on. I believe the moment we've all been waiting for.
Here it is.
The one I've been really looking forward to talking about. My team, Slow Stroke Kings. Pete, if I may, I'll just run down my team real quick.
Yep.
My first pitch on this team is that I feel like I'm being valued at my absolute floor. I think that people are looking at last year and they're disregarding how injury prone my team was. I had Mac Jones missing, all those weeks with his sprained ankle. I had Tua obviously dealing with the concussion issues. There were a lot of weeks where Davis Mills was my only starting quarterback. Traylon Burks was missing weeks. I didn't get a guy like Christian Watson until late in the season. I didn't get a guy like George Pickens until late in the season. I was dealing with a lot of injuries. I had a lot of bad luck for that. I mean, I think it was in like the first 4 weeks. I believe I was like the 6th or 7th team in the league. So once those injuries started piling up, I just took a nosedive when it came to the point. So I feel like I'm being valued at that. I feel like people are looking at me way too close to an Amaral type team than I like. It doesn't sit right with me. I understand, right? I mean, I got Tua. That's a top 12 guy. Obviously, there are the injury concerns. I'm not too worried about it. I know that I'm dealing with the quarterback issue. I got Kyler. I traded for him in the offseason. He's not going to play at all this year. I thought that Clayton Tune might be a guy that could play for me as the starter this year. News broke today. I'm down bad. I don't have that quarterback. I don't have a second quarterback right now. I'm trying to find a solution. Right now, I'm starting, I think, Christian Watson as my super flex. That's only because he plays the latest game of my starting receivers. Elijah Moore is actually who was substituted in there. Before we get too deep into it, Pete, we'll just focus on my quarterbacks. Let's just do a temperature check on you and Tua. How are you feeling about Tua?
Tua's a top 12 quarterback. Arguably the player we have talked about the most on every single episode of Lex and Pete show. I gave him his flowers over a year ago, I think at the end of last year. We still have this unwritten bet that we have, my longtime take that Kenny Pickett will be a better quarterback than Tua, but I'm not very confident in that. I think Tua is a top 12 guy. He showed it when he was healthy last year. He's got 2 top 10 wide receivers, unbelievable head coach, great scheme, great system. If he stays healthy, I've got Tua as a top 10 guy. And I just absolutely you've led the league in moves, trades, moves, whatever, since the birth of Friends Who Gamble. Getting Kyler Murray was by far my favorite move the Social Kings have ever been made. And I do think you're going to be in the conversation next year of that 2 QB floor. Like you have 2 top 12 guys, you're going to have that QB floor. Maybe you're the 4th team behind the 3 teams we talked about earlier. So I love this quarterback room. It's obviously just not going to come together until next year.
Yeah, and I just want to give a shout out to some of my guys, right? So Clayton Tune is a guy that I still think is going to get an opportunity to start this year. I believe by like all the athletic metrics, he was the second most athletic quarterback at the combine behind Anthony Richardson. He was a 5th-round pick, but he was the first quarterback that Jonathan Gannon selected. Why not just see what you have, right? Why not see what you have in the rookie
Yep.
quarterback at some point? They're bringing in Josh Dobbs to be the tank commander. At some point, they're going to hand over those keys because Dobbs isn't getting the job done. We see it all the time in these situations. So I think that he's going to get that opportunity. He can run a little bit. We'll see how the passing translates. I thought he looked good. His stats weren't fantastic when it came to the accuracy in terms of attempts and completions, but he was out there. He was slinging it. He was making some good throws. One pro tip for anybody that's listening, this is for a little nugget that I'm going to sprinkle in there for the true loyal Lex and Pete listeners. If Tune becomes a starter, go out and pick up Greg Dortch. Anytime I look up, because every day when I did my daily Twitter searches of all my players and I saw Clayton Tune highlights, he was always having great completions to Greg Dortch. I don't have the room on him for my team. If you have the space to take him on when Clayton Tune gets that starting job, go out, get Greg Dortch. He'll probably be cheap. Just do it. Just trust me. Thank me later. Beyond that, like you said, Kyler Murray, I'm not going to see the Tua Kyler stack come to fruition this year. I am very confident in how it's going to be moving forward. I do think that I do get myself into that conversation, like you were saying, but I do have my developmental guys, right? I drafted Levis this year at the end of the first round. I'm hoping that he can become something next year. I don't expect him to take that starting job this year, especially if Tannehill stays healthy. I got to talk about my son, AOC, Aiden O'Connell. It's only a matter of time before he gets his starting job in Vegas, right? I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, he's a bum. He was put on this earth to start and then have a late round rookie take the job from him. AOC, he looked amazing. He was like by far the best quarterback in the preseason, put up amazing stats. Not only was he like leading touchdown drives and throwing them, he was leading like scoring drives even when he wasn't doing it with his arm. He was getting them in position so they could run it into the end zone. He just looked great. And I think that in that McDaniel system, I really like him. He had those Brady comps. Of course, it's like ridiculous to make to somebody, but like on film, he truly looks like him in the pocket, right? The way that he stands in there, the way that he throws the ball, the way that he commands it, he plays just like him. Of course, he's not going to become the greatest quarterback of all time, but we've seen how that style of quarterback works in this McDaniel system. I like it. So, I mean, I think that it's only a matter of time before Garoppolo like breaks his foot or sprains his wrist or something, and he can't play. AOC comes in because he's going to beat out Brian Hoyer for the job because Hoyer's a bald bum, and AOC is going to get his chance. He's not going to let it go. And then I just got to get this takeoff as well. Sam Darnold and or Jarrett Stidham will be starting games this year. Either Brock Purdy's elbow is not going to be right and it's not going to work out. Darnold's going to come in as the QB2, or Russell Wilson is still going to be washed up. They brought in Stidham on a pretty big backup contract. I think Sean Payton really likes him. I don't think Sean Payton likes Russell Wilson at all. So if Wilson slips up at all, I think that Stidham's also going to get an opportunity. We saw how he played when he stepped in relief for Derek Carr last year as well. Pete, you got anything to say before we move on to the running backs?
No, I love the prospects. I mean, I've preached it on this show. Pick up quarterbacks. They eventually get their shot, especially if they were drafting the NFL. You clearly took advantage of that with guys like Tune and AOC. Levis waiting in the wings. I actually think Levis could get a shot at starting this year. As soon as the Titans are outside the playoff race, I do believe they have a pretty good out next year on Tannehill's contract with a smaller dead cap, because I was looking at Malik and when he could get a shot. I think next year is the years they move on from Tannehill, and so I can see Levis getting starts this year. The last thing I'll say about the quarterback room is you bought Kyler as absolute floor. I don't expect people to be high on him this year. I don't expect people to be high on him in the offseason. I don't expect people to be high on him going into next year. But this is a guy that's 26 years old, QB3, QB6, QB10 seasons under his belt. He was QB 19 last year, but he only played 11 games. Probably would have got to that top 10 if he kept playing. So Kyler's a stud. And if you don't think so, then you're a bird who's just been, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, exactly. And, my team's going to struggle for as long as I don't have a second starting quarterback. But I do think that overall, I mean, like I was saying, and we'll get into it when we get into these other positional groups, but like everyone's looking at it like, oh, this guy's not going to take the jump. Oh, he's still playing like this. What if my guys just take that step? right? Like,
Yeah,
what if all my receivers take
we'll
that
get
next
there.
step
Yeah,
up
we'll get them the
and they
receivers.
become 1,000-yard guys? What if my running backs work out? So we'll get into that in a second. Right now, I do want to talk about my running backs, and I'm
Yep.
a bit thin at running back right now, but I have been kind of adopting that zero running back approach.
Yep.
Piron's a guy that I'm really big on. I love him in redraft this year. I went out, I felt like I could get him for really cheap from Amaral, so I did. We've seen Sean Payton have a two-headed backfield that's been productive in years past, right? We've seen Latavius Murray be successful alongside Kamara. We've also seen Mark Ingram put up a top 10 season alongside Kamara, I'm pretty sure. So we know that can work. He's going to be working with Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams had a nasty knee injury, and he is back ahead of schedule. We saw it last year with J.K. Dobbins, right? These guys, they come back, they're able to play, but are they really able to play? Piron's going to get more opportunity than I think is currently being projected. I think that he's slightly undervalued for how he's going to be used for at least until Javonte Williams is back to full speed. And who knows if he gets back to full speed this year, right? Then we already talked about Charbonnet. We talked about Walker. I do think that Charbonnet is going to become that reliable workhorse backer. I guess technically not a workhorse back because, it's going to be a more equal split. But when it comes to, like I said, establishing the run, I think that's going to be Charbonnet, right? You need to really just keep it inside the tackles. You need to play some physical football. That's who they're going to give it to, right? So I like him there. And then I just got some guys that are, maybe a little more speculative, right? I got Jerome Ford, who I think is going to take over. I need him to take over that Kareem Hunt role in Cleveland. If it's not him, I hope that it's Pierre Strong, who I thought was going to take over that receiving back role in New England. That kind of got sabotaged by that last second trade to Cleveland, but hopefully it's just one of them two. Hopefully one of them two can claim that second running back role and be productive in a pass catching role. And then, I think that my guy Izzy could get busy in New York this year, right? Because we don't know if Breece Hall is going to be able to take on that full workload. Dalvin Cook's been dealing with the shoulder, right? He was dealing with the injuries last year. He is getting a little bit older. We don't know how healthy these top two running backs are going to be. And I really liked Izzy going into this year because I felt like he was going to serve in that home run hitter role. Dalvin Cook slid right in and took that from him. I think that Izzy is a similar player to Dalvin Cook in terms of that, right? He's the big play hitter. He can really hit that gap and just take off. If Dalvin Cook were to go down or just not be able to produce, I do think that Izzy could find a role in that. It's going to be tough as a rookie. Got so much tougher when he came in, but I do love him as a prospect. I find him very interesting. That's really it for my running back room. Like I said, I am adopting more of that zero RB approach, something similar to what we've seen two pins do, how they've been able to just find those replacement level guys. Pete, how are you feeling about my guys right now?
Yeah, the running back room is the worst running back room in the league, maybe just above Amaral. But that's the strategy. That's the strategy. For those who don't know zero running back strategy, you address every other position on the roster, starting with quarterbacks, wide receivers, then to tight ends before running backs. And that's what you did. You got two top 12 running quarterbacks now. We'll talk about the wide receiver room next. You got Kincaid and Meyer. We'll talk to them about tight ends. So you addressed every position on your roster to compete in the future, with running backs being the last one. So I don't think I really don't even think you have a startable running back on the roster, right? Like when the slow stroke kings make the playoffs, none of these dudes are going to be starting for you. Maybe Charbonnet down the line, but as far as I'm concerned right now, he's a backup running back. A guy you should hold, but a backup running back. And then you're talking about guys like, Pierre Strong, Jerome Ford, Samaje Perine, Izzy Abakanda. Those are dudes, like when they flash in the pan this year, I'd be trying to sell for like a second or maybe package them up for draft capital down the line. Because like I said, when the Social Kings do eventually make the playoffs, how far out that may be, these dudes aren't going to be on the starting roster. So I don't think you have anyone in the running back room. I don't think you need anyone in the running back room right now. You had James Conner and AJ Dillon or Aaron Jones in your roster like a month ago. So you've proven that you can figure it out at running back when you need to. But now it's just not the time you need to. So I don't think there's anyone there in the running back room, and I don't think you need to have anyone there right now.
Yeah, there's no need for me to spend too big. Like you're saying, when it's time for me to compete, like a guy like P. Ryan likely won't even be on my roster at that point, right? That's like a year or two down the road. I will push back a little bit. On Charbonnet, right? I understand that Ken Walker, he has done it. Like we've seen him flash last year. He was, in the conversation for Rookie of the Year. He was playing really well. But at the same time, Charbonnet, like I said earlier, he has pretty much the exact same draft capital as Ken Walker, right? So they just saw what Ken did for them last year, and they still said, you know what, we want to spend that exact same draft pick on another running back. That's a
Yep.
big investment to make, right? You got to
Yep.
follow the money. You got to follow the draft capital there. Charbonnet is going to get his opportunity, and I just like how he projects as a pro a little bit more. And of course, that's tough to say when you're comparing him to a guy that has done it. But I
Right.
just like that style. I've talked about it, right? I feel like he could be the guy that really is the chain mover for them. He's going to have to, in a rainy game, he's going to be the guy getting all the carries, shit like that. So right now, if I were, sure, I'm a little bit biased, but I went out and I ranked him high before, the draft and
Yep.
before I even had an opportunity to get him. So, I mean, I feel like I'm still consistent on that take, but I
Yep.
like him more. I mean, I just feel like he's a pro-ready running back. I think he's going to surprise a lot of people. And I think this year, right? I mean, yes, like when you compare it to other running back rooms, right? I don't have the Bijan or the Austin Eckler, right? I don't have that guy. But at the same time, I mean, if P. Ryan and Charbonnet are both putting up 10 points a week, which is what they're both projected, I mean, who can really complain, right? I mean, that's on a week-to-week basis. That's going to be just as good as, 5 or 6 other teams in the league. So sure, I don't have that depth right now. Sure, over the course of a season, it might not supply me as I might get outpaced by other teams. But I think in a vacuum each week, I think, these guys are going to be able to do good enough. And like you said, that's my strategy. But
Yep.
let's move on to what we really want to talk about. We want to talk about my wide receivers. I put myself up there as one of the better wide receiver rooms in the league. I think that it also depends on how you look at it, right? I mean, there are
Yep.
definitely receiver rooms that have the older, more established veterans that are actually putting up those top 10 numbers. And then there's the dynasty outlook. And I think that when you look at it from a dynasty perspective, I put myself up against, you with CeeDee Lamb and Garrett Wilson and Judy Pittman. You got the Zits with Olave and Amon-Ra and Ayuk and Pickens and all that. I put myself in that conversation as well, right? I got Drake London, I got Christian Watson, I got Traylon Burks, I got Jordan Addison, I got my guy, Elijah Moore, and then I got some prospects as well when it comes to Hodgins, Pierce, and Hyatt. Pete, where do you want to start on my wide receivers?
I want you to start. I want to hear where you're at.
Okay, so we'll start. I mean, I won't say it's in any particular order. I don't want my guys to get jealous or anything, but I will say my number one, my baby boy, that is the Drake, right? Drake London, I think this year is going to surprise a lot of people. I think that people are just kind of underrating maybe this whole Falcons offense. This is a team that I've already said I've picked them to win the NFC South. But I think that people are looking at it saying, "Oh, it's low volume. I don't know about Desmond Ritter." I think that they're still going to be just fine. I think they're going to be able to move the ball. I mean, you have Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson on an offense. How bad can it really be, right? We already saw that Arthur Smith can scheme up, a good rushing attack with Tyler Algier as his running back. Now he's doing it with Bijan Robinson. Now he's doing it with a generational running back prospect. They're going to do a lot of RPOs. They're going to be looking at that first look, right? That first read. I think that first read a lot of times is going to be Drake London. I think Drake London is going to be an absolute target hog. In the 4 games that he played with Ritter last year, that was the last month of the season, he averaged 9 targets a game. Over 17 games, that's 153 targets. That would have been 6th in the league. That puts him, I think that put him ahead of Kelsey. That puts him with like Diggs. That puts him with, all those other top guys. So, I mean, I think that if he's able to keep that up, even if it's not 9 targets, even if it's 7 or 8, that's a lot of looks to get in a game. I think he's going to be pushing for 100 yards on a lot of weeks. I think he's big body. He's a jump ball guy. I think that he can become a red zone threat, a real end zone threat as well. So, I mean, I think that at some point, it's only a matter of time before Drake London really takes that big leap. I think that you like the Drake as well. How do you feel about him? You also have plenty of stock in that Falcons offense.
Yeah, I love Drake London. I love Drake London. I think that if Drake London gets drafted to the New York Jets, we are talking about him as we're talking about Garrett Wilson this offseason. If Drake London gets drafted to the New Orleans Saints, we're talking about him even maybe I think he could have done even better than Chris Olave did last year on the Saints. But he got drafted by the Falcons. And the Falcons are who the Falcons were last year. I threw away the complete last year of Kyle Pitts because of Marcus Mariota, and I would do the same thing with the Drake. Throw the year out. But he did show us what he can do. I think he's an athletic freak. And like I said, I think we're talking about him as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver if he's not on the Atlanta Falcons.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, right, people say, oh, well, they got so many weapons there. I think that when they really hit their stride, I think that Falcons offense is going to run 90% of the way through Drake, Pitts, and Bijan. Like, I don't
Yeah,
think that Mac Hollins is going to be getting a lot of targets.
he's a
I don't
blocker.
think that Jonnu Smith is going to be getting a lot of targets.
Blocker.
Last year, I mean, maybe he gets like 5 to 7 carries a game or something just to give Bijan a break. But these guys are going to be the workhorses for that offense. I think that they're all going to get ample opportunity to shine. So I really am not too worried about any of them eating into each other's workload. I think that they're just going to get the entire workload. Just the three of them going to split the pie. So I love the Drake. I think a lot of people in the Dynasty community are high on him, so I don't think I have to do too much convincing on him. But I do think that there are maybe two other guys that are maybe a little more controversial, right?
Right.
One guy is Christian Watson, right? He had that monster second half when he came back, played the 8 games. He had the 3 touchdown game against Dallas. I think he had another 2 touchdown game as well. And then he had some big yardage games as well. It wasn't all touchdowns. He had, a couple 100-yard games. He had a couple massive catches. He had that catch against the Eagles with Jordan Love as his quarterback,
Yep.
where he was, sweeping across and then he just turned the burners on. And I
Yep.
think Watson's a guy that is, sneaky, like a legit stud. Like, I don't think he was a flash in the pan. He is huge. He's like 6'5". He is a freak athlete. I
Four
think that,
three. I think 4.3 speed.
yeah, he ran like a 4.3. The injuries do seem to be a bit of a concern. He was dealing with some hamstring stuff. I know that he's currently dealing with a hamstring right now. He was dealing with a concussion last year, but when he was on the field, he was amazing. He was incredibly efficient with his touches. And what I like about him is the fact that he doesn't need a lot of touches to be a productive receiver, right? He's a guy that
Right.
just needs 3 or 4 receptions. Most of those games that he was going crazy in that second half, he was only getting 3 or 4 catches. That's
Right.
all he needs to do. So it's like, I don't care if they bring in more receiving talent, because if anything, I think that's good for him. I think that opens up the field for him, that
Yeah.
allows him to spread out, that spreads out the defenders, makes him harder to catch in the open field. So I say bring those guys in, draft Jaden Reed, throw more to Romeo Dobbs, make him more of a legit threat. I hope that Luke Musgrave becomes a good tight end for them, because I think that more successful weapons in that offense will actually be better for a guy like him. And then I want to tie it in with another guy, Traylon Burks, who I think kind of falls into that same category. I don't think that Burks, and of course, we still have to see a lot, right? I think he shined a lot in a few games last year. It was tough for him to do it in a lot with Josh Dobbs, Malik Willis throwing him the ball. But when he came back and he had like a 3 or 4 game stretch with Ryan Tannehill as his quarterback, he was playing like great football. I mean, he made Jair Alexander look like a child in Green Bay.
Yep. Yep.
He had a fantastic catch against Philly, and then he got concussed on the touchdown catch. But I mean, he was like on his way to having a good game there as well. So he was playing really well with Tannehill. I do think that Tannehill is providing an underrated boost to that Titans offense. And I think he's another guy where I think bringing in D-Hop is actually good for a guy like him, because Traylon Burks is not going to be a 10 target a game guy. He's going to be a guy just like Christian Watson, who he needs to just get the ball in open space, and he needs to just make it happen. He's a huge guy. He can go up and get the ball. He can outrun guys. He can move with his speed. So I really like him as well. I think that he can provide a really good year 2 breakout. I think the Titans are going to be a sneaky team. They're my pick to win the AFC South. I think they're at least going to be, a game behind the Jags if they lose it. I just think it's much closer than the odds suggest. But yeah, I think Burks and Watson are two guys where Watson, people are wondering, is it a fluke? And then Burks, people are just having their questions because of all the injuries last year. How do you feel about these two guys?
Yeah, and I'll even talk about the Drake in the same sentence. Like we're talking about a trio of sophomore wide receivers, right?
Yeah.
I love these 3 players as players. I love their skill set, and I think they could be very good wide receivers in the NFL. The problem I have is the teams they're on and the quarterbacks are throwing to them. A wise man, my mentor, aka Two Pins, George, once said he doesn't want any wide receivers with shitty quarterbacks. We already talked about Jordan Love. You're higher on Jordan Love, Ryan Tannehill than I am, I think, and we both kind of feel the same way about Desmond Ridder. So, like you just said it in your last point. We have a lot to see. We've got a lot to see. When you look at Watson's touchdowns from last year, he is like 15 yards away from the cornerback. Like his speed is insane. The amount of separation he was getting off these guys was crazy, and you can see it through the touchdown progression he had last year. Traylon Burks, you kind of have to throw away last year too because of the injury history. And I already said you got to throw away Drake's London's last year because of Marcus Mariota. So there's just a lot to see with these 3. And I don't love the system of quarterbacks that they're in to get them there. So I was looking at projections again. Drake London, wide receiver 19, Watson, wide receiver 32, Traylon Burks, wide receiver 43. So it just feels like the talent you have in the wide receiver room is a lot better than those projections. I think that you got to see at least like two of these guys, like one of them take a top 15 step, and then another one take like a top 25 step, and then maybe another one somewhere in the 20 to 30 range. So like it like how you feel about the slow stroke kings, I feel like really comes down to how you feel about these sophomore wide receivers.
Yeah, and I think I think it's a valid point with the quarterbacks, right? They don't have the greatest quarterback situations, but to my point that I was making about both Watson and Burks, I just don't think that they're guys that need a ton of volume. So
Right.
if they're just getting the ball, 3, 4, like I trust Jordan Love and I trust Ryan Tannehill. Even more so Ryan Tannehill, just because this is a discussion we've had, but like I think that people severely underrate the value of a veteran quarterback versus a rookie or an inexperienced player
Right.
that just can't throw the ball. I mean, like the difference in quarterback play from that they had with Tannehill versus what they had with Malik and Josh Dobbs was like astronomical. Like
Right.
they
Right.
made Tannehill look like like a top 10 guy just because they literally couldn't throw the ball. I mean, they had multiple games under 100 passing yards. They could not move the ball. So they're going to bring in a guy now. They're going to bring back a guy, I should say, that he can throw for 250 yards a game. He can throw for over 300, at times. And also, this is another one where they got rid of Todd Downey, who was their offensive coordinator last year. He was probably drunk for most of it. He had that DUI coming off the team plane. But they're bringing in a guy that I'm pretty sure he worked. He was the offensive coordinator. I don't know if he was the OC in Houston, but he was working on the offensive staff in Houston. He worked back when DeAndre Hopkins was on the team, so he's got experience with Hopkins, and he's shown like a proficiency for passing. I think he was the passing game coordinator. He's coming in, so I think that that's a sign to me, just like I was saying with the Ravens, that they want to throw the ball a little bit more. They want to air it out a little bit more. I think that they trust these two wide receivers to really figure it out. I mean, D Hop seems to be QB proof, and then like I said, Traylon Burks is a low volume guy. I think that he can really create some fireworks on just like 4 catches a game. So even with the shitty quarterback play, I think that the volume doesn't have to be high enough
Because of
where
the
that's going to
talent.
be as
Yeah.
big a factor as it would be for a guy. I mean, you could even say if you really don't like Ritter, then that could suck for Drake. But I mean, I think Ritter's going to be good enough to get on the ball. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, these are 3 guys, and like I said, I think that I'm being valued with that skepticism, right? I think that everybody looks at that and
Right.
says, well, I don't trust this, I don't trust this, I don't trust this. What if Burks takes that second year step, right? What if Watson proves that second half last year wasn't a fluke? What if Drake London does get 153 targets this season? All
Yeah.
of a sudden, we're talking about my team a lot different. I mean, I'm still going to struggle without that second quarterback. I might not have the running backs to get me over the top, but my argument really in my defense of my team is just that I'm not as bad as I feel like people view me as. I feel like people view me, like I said, closer to an Amaral team. People say, I got to get his pick because it's going to be the second overall pick. It's going to be the third overall pick. It's going to be in the lottery. I think I'm going to be more competitive than people are giving me credit for. I think another one, and this is another one of my starters, speaking of volume, I think this is a guy that could get a lot of volume. Jordan Addison, right?
Yep. Yep.
He's going to be playing in this offense. Adam Thielen, he had, let's see. Thielen was wide receiver 10 in 2020, which is when JJ was a rookie. That's when he put up the greatest rookie wide receiver season of all time. He was 28 and he was 29, Thielen was, in 21 and 22. I think Jordan Addison is going to be able to fill that void, and he had about 100 targets each year as well. So now they're going to have 100 targets to give out, and they're bringing in a guy who I think is currently better than Adam Thielen was these last 2 years. Jordan Addison, he was the best wide receiver in the country 2 years ago. He went to USC. He didn't put up the same eye-popping stats. That's because the system was different, right? He wasn't being leaned on as that like total wide receiver one. They had a quarterback that could run it a little bit. He was spreading the ball out more, but he was still the leading wide receiver on that team. He still made some highlight plays, still had some massive games. Addison's going to step into that big role. Right now, he's a wide receiver 3. I don't think that's really going to be the case. Justin Jefferson was listed as a wide receiver 3 his rookie season as well. Like I said, he put up an all-time great rookie season. So I think Addison's going to come in. I think he's going to be a stud. I think that he can make a push for like a top 30, top 25. Who knows how much higher he can go than that season, though. I mean, I think that, we've talked about it. I think you agree. He could be the best rookie wide receiver this year. Who knows how that plays out long term, but at least this season, he could put up those best stats. That's another one of my stars. So throwing him in the mix, I mean, like I said, I put myself in that conversation when it comes to the full dynasty outlook with my wide receivers, but I think that this top 4 is really going to be a dangerous foursome for years to come. How do you feel about Addison?
Yeah, if you follow Dynasty Twitter at all, you've probably seen the stat, but the last 11 years, a rookie wide receiver has cracked the top 24 wide receivers. My pick is Addison to do that this year. I think it's a bit of a bold prediction. I think Drake and Watson most likely score more, but I think if I were to make a bold prediction, Jordan Addison scores the most fantasy points in your wide receiver room this year. It's a bold prediction for a reason. Watson and Drake obviously protected more than Addison, but that's how much I love Addison. We talked about it on the Amaral episode when he was a prospect, but just elite route runner, former Belinkoff winner, elite route winner, and he's getting all of that volume from Thielen. I don't think KJ Osborne is going to see the field in two wide receiver sets. And they added Hawkinson, but they had Hawkinson last year, and we still saw the targets go away from those two. Addison's never going to be double covered. They have to run high safety over Jefferson. He's going to have single coverage, and I think with the route running talent he has, he burns that single coverage every time. So I really, really, really love Jordan Addison. I think he's a top 24 wide receiver this year. And my bold take would be he scores the most fantasy points out of your wide receiver room.
Yeah, I like it, and I hope that that's the case. I mean, yeah, like you said, he's not going to see any double coverage this year. It's going to be singles. And I saw a quote from him last week where he said, I got to win the one-on-ones. So he knows what he has to do. I think that, he's a guy where, maybe he's a future diva receiver. We know that he was dealing with, his sick dog that he had to speed home for, this offseason. But, I think that he's a guy, people were complaining about him when he got drafted. He said, let's go get paid. People say, oh, he's all about the money. I don't give a shit. Okay. If he wants to make these big contracts, he has to put up massive stats. So if that's what drives him, then why do I care? Right. If he's going out there, he has to put up insane seasons to get these record breaking contracts. Then I think that benefits me. So I'm happy for it. Wrapping it up on the receivers. I got four other guys that I do think are interesting names. Elijah Moore, I think, is primed for a bounce back season in Cleveland. I think he was just severely underused in New York last year. There's plenty of tape out there. You can go watch it yourself. He was wide open on so many opportunities. They just had such shitty quarterbacks. They only wanted to look first look. That was always Garrett Wilson. So he was the one that got to thrive because of that. They're going to pass him more in Cleveland. He's going to get more opportunity. He's looked good in practices with Deshaun Watson. They've shown great chemistry. They've worked a lot together. So I like him for a big bounce back. I love him in redraft as well. Hodgins, Pierce, and Hyatt, I think, are interesting. Hodgins and Hyatt, obviously, both in that New York Giants room. We've talked about the Giants plenty of times before, but there's so much opportunity there. So somebody's going to step up. I think these are two names where I like my odds to have at least one of these guys be one of the guys to step up. And then Alec Pierce, I think, is a little slept on right now. I know people love Michael Pittman. He's proven, more proven as a top receiver in that room. But I do think that for year one with Anthony Richardson, I think that Pierce's skill set translates a little bit better. He's way more of a deep ball guy. That's something that Anthony Richardson can already do. So if Pierce is able to break out down the field, Richardson's going to find him for some deep targets. I think that he can have some big touchdowns, and even if he doesn't get into the end zone, some big catches. So I do think that Pierce is a good guy to keep an eye on. Do you like any of these guys to break out?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would say I love Elijah Moore. I think you bought him at his lowest peak or his lowest value since he was drafted. And I really love the Browns offense. They're going to take a step. There's no doubt in my mind Elijah Moore is going to be worth more than you bought him for. And I'd say out of those three, I like Hyatt the most. He's a deep ball threat. That wide receiver room is wide open in New York. You got Waller, big Waller in the middle of the field, and Hyatt could be that burner on the outside that takes the top off the defense. So I
love him switching to 13 too. I love him getting Odell's number, going from 84 to 13. I love stuff like that. So that gives me a lot of hope. And then, one guy I do want to give some shine to is Hodgins as well, right? I don't think he's ever going to be like that top tier option, but I do think that he can establish himself as like a Jacoby Myers type receiver. And there's value in that, right? Having that on your bench, having that for bye weeks, having that just in case you get a bunch of injuries to your receiver room, that's huge. So, I mean, if he's a guy that is my wide receiver 5, 6, 7 moving forward, then I'm very happy to have had him in that massive trade where I got like 7 guys from or I traded like 7 guys to the Suns. So if he's like my last receiver off the bench, then I'm happy to have him. So I think that these are some interesting guys. I think that overall I have a lot of interesting kind of project players on my bench. My final pass catchers are my tight ends, right? I got the 2 rookies now. I got Kincaid, I got Mayer, I got baby Kelsey, I got baby Gronk. I love both of these guys, right? Mayer, I'm not sure how quickly things will translate. I do think that he's such an elite blocker that he'll find his way on the field very quickly. It just comes down to how many targets will he be able to command in that offense. Kincaid, I think, is a guy that's going to flash right away. I mean, they're using him as a wide receiver. I don't care that he isn't like a fantastic blocker. That's why they have Dawson Knox. They got Dawson Knox. They'll have him in line. They'll have him right there, right next to the offensive line, blocking away as that sixth lineman. And they're going to have Kincaid out there running routes, running routes as a slot receiver and, scoring touchdowns. They're going to be using him early. So, there's a lot of targets up for grabs next to Stephon Diggs. So I like Kincaid to break out, pretty early, especially early on for the typical timeline of a tight end. And then Mayer as like my second option. Maybe it's not right away. Maybe he's never, that top 5 guy. But like if he could be like a Freiermuth type guy where he's just consistently putting up those numbers as my tight end too, then, I think that I'm set for well over a decade at tight end.
Yeah, I love Kincaid. Love Kincaid. Typically, you just don't see rookie tight ends pop their first year. We had Kyle Pitts get that 1,000-yard season 2 years ago, which was a huge flash in the pan for him. I do think Kincaid has that potential in his rookie year. They're running him like in the slot. Like he's getting looks in the slot in the red zone as a slot receiver. So like I just love that. I don't trust Gabe Davis. I think you and I have continuously been low on Gabe Davis every year, year on year. So I think Kincaid is a reasonable number 2 option in arguably one of the best offenses in the National Football League, which is really good. I don't care about the blocking whatsoever. Travis Kelce doesn't block.
Yeah, he's not going to have to block. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, you don't get points for blocking. Sure, it keeps you on the field, but you don't get points for blocking. If he's
and one thing that we had talked about, right, was like the baby Kelce thing and all that. And, of course, it's like I was saying with AOC, right? It's ridiculous to make like a true comparison to Tom Brady, but you can still say like mechanics are the same, all shit like that. And sure, like I don't think we're ever going to see that perfect storm of a tight end with the talent of Kelce paired up with the quarterback talent of Pat Mahomes again. Right. So that is a perfect storm. Who knows if Kelce or even Gronk, if they have the same careers, if they're not tied to 2 of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, right? But Kincaid, he is with Josh Allen, so that's a good thing. But also, I do think that we're going to start to see an influx of tight ends that are like Travis Kelce moving forward. I think that 5-10 years from now, that's what tight ends are just going to be, right? They're going to be these massive wide receivers. Nobody's going to care about tight end blocking evermore because they're going to say, oh, well, if you look at the analytics, it's actually better to have him line up out as a receiver and then throw him all these targets. So, I do think that that's going to become more of the prototype, just like we're seeing in basketball, right? Everyone shoots threes now. You see a bunch of these kids that are, way too undersized, playing point guard, just chucking it from half court, because that's what Steph Curry does, and it works for him. So, I think we're going to start seeing more of that, and I think we're going to start seeing a higher hit rate on these more athletic tight ends. So, maybe we don't see that true peak form as Kelce, but I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that than, like the big bulky guy that's like, just really athletic for his size. I think we're going to start seeing some serious freaks at tight end. Anyway, that's it for the Slow Stroke Kings. Do we want to get in some final predictions for the division?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
So what are we thinking? Over, under 2.5 playoff teams?
Under.
So you say Wallace doesn't make the cut. Where do you think Wallace finishes out?
I think right on the edge. I think he's the 7th team, the first one out. I think he loses a points for battle with Big Brain and Vibers.
And where do you think Big Brain's going to end up?
Big Brain,
sound like
Big
you
Brain,
have him right
Vibers
on the fringe.
Big Brain, Vibers, and Bowen. One of the Bowens. He'll lose the points for battle too. I do think Big Brain will be they'll be the second wild card in. So they're going to lose to the Vibers in points for the first wild card, but they're going to beat whichever Bowen gets the wild card from the Gabagool division.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. Yeah, I think I think that's a pretty fair layout. Yep, I think you got 2 pins winning LeBron haters, and you got one of the Bowens winning Gabagool, then you got Simcoe winning Sprite Cranberry. Yep. Yeah, and then you have that as the next year. I think that's pretty fair. I think that's probably my projection as well. All right, before we end it, let's do what everybody's been waiting for, the blind resume.
Let's go.
I feel like this has been hyped beyond belief now. All right, so I want to read it to you. So right now,
just so we know, I don't know who the player is. We haven't talked about this before. I'm completely blind as just everyone else.
I will say it is a 2-to-1 split on the vote. So we got I asked for 12. I asked 12 owners, all from different teams, some from the same team, for their opinion. One option has been voted for by 8 people. The other option has been voted for by 4. So pretty significant. That's a pretty big one. Okay, I'm going to start. I don't know if you got a pen and paper. It's only a few stats, so it's not too crazy, but
I'm ready.
Player A, this is a second half edition. This is the final 8 games of the season.
Okay.
Player A had 31 receptions on 52 targets, 523 yards, 7 touchdowns, and for what it's worth, a 59.6 catch percentage. So that's just how many receptions they had on their targets, you know? So
Okay.
31 receptions on 52 targets, 523 yards, 7 touchdowns. Player B had 41 receptions on 79 targets for 582 yards, but only 2 touchdowns. And once again, a 51.9 catch percentage. So again, that's just receptions divided by targets. Pete, who are you taking?
Who am I taking? As in, which player am I taking?
Just blind resume. Blind resume. Which one would you rather have? So you pretty much have one that's lower targets but very efficient with their touches, and then you have another that is just a target machine.
Yeah.
79 targets to 52, but when it comes to the overall, the yardage, it's only 60 yards of difference, and player A with the less targets has more touchdowns.
Yeah. I'm saying player 2, player B on a blind resume. On a blind resume where I don't know the situation, I can't be confident in touchdown progression or regression. I'm going to take the more targets every time, just based off those stats I got. And I also just feel like player 1 could be Christian Watson. 7 touchdowns in the last 8 games. 7 touchdowns in the last 8 games. That sounds like Christian Watson to me.
I will say I was worried that might give it away.
Yeah.
But also, I must give you an applause because I was unable to trick you. Player B was Garrett Wilson.
Wow. Wow.
Player A won the vote
Wow.
with 8. Player A had 8 votes. Christian Watson had 8 votes to Garrett Wilson's 4. I will say I totally hear the argument, and I would obviously lean in that direction. I think Garrett Wilson has shown more, and I do agree with you that I think it's safer to bet on the targets and then just go straight on the volume.
Right.
But I do think it's interesting. I mean, second half, so that stretch of games, that 8-game stretch, that starts with Christian Watson's 3 touchdown game against Dallas. And like I said, that's the second half of the year, so that's when he returned from injury. Really, I felt like that was a pretty natural split, and I just found it interesting, that he was at least able to, be this comparable in stats, even on a lower volume, with a guy like Garrett Wilson, who's getting all this love coming out of the rookie year. So I think it's an interesting argument, right? And I think it goes to my argument that I think Christian Watson's maybe undervalued because people think it's so fluky, and I know that they say touchdowns aren't a sticky stat, but at the same time, I mean, some guys are just really good at finding the end zone, right? We see it with Mike Evans every year. Obviously, last year he did take a little bit of a step back, but some guys seem to always find the end zone. So who really knows? I like him to take a step up. I've seen him, kind of serve as like a leadership role with a lot of the wide receivers this year. I've seen some clips of that as well. So I think that he's ready to take that step. I trust him as a big guy. I like him, but yeah, I mean, I thought it was an interesting exercise.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very interesting comparison.
Right, because if I asked you, okay,
crazy.
second half last year, who would you rather have, Garrett Wilson or Christian Watson? You're not even thinking. You're saying Garrett Wilson.
I'm chuckling. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, you think it's ridiculous. I think it's interesting to put that up. So, maybe I'll dig a little bit deeper. Maybe we'll start working the blind resume back into the rotation on this show. I like doing that. I think it's interesting to see.
Yeah,
I thought maybe I could have thrown you off when I was talking about Keenan Allen's second half last year as well, when he was putting up 15 points a game. I was hoping that might be able to throw you off the scent, but I knew the whole time the 7 touchdowns would probably be a pretty bad giveaway.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are in the weeds, so we're looking at stats like that, but I think it shows you. I mean, 8-4, that's a pretty significant win on the vote. So I think it shows you, like, a lot of owners in this league, they're choosing based off, not. It's touchdowns. Like they see the touchdowns and they just jump right at it. But I think, you and I are in the weeds. We've done our homework on these wide receivers. We know targets is a safer way to bet.
Yeah.
It also shows you, it backs up your point on Christian Watson, how he doesn't really need all those catches and targets to have a big impact. I mean, he clearly dusted Garrett Wilson in the last 8 games of the year on 30 less targets. So it kind of backs up your point there.
Exactly. And I know for sure, I don't have like a highlight reel just like rolling in my brain, but I know that there were definitely catches that he had that were like perfectly placed balls by Rodgers. He's not going to get that with Jordan Love this year. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily have to be their scheme. They might be doing, different touches, maybe keep it a little bit shorter, let him get the ball closer to the line of scrimmage, let him work it. And, open field and stuff like that. So opportunities can change up and how he's getting those catches. But yep, just like I said, I don't think he needs a massive amount of volume to be able to catch up. So if he can continue to be that efficient with his touches and still find the end zone on a consistent basis, then I think he can break out, as a true, 1 or 2 receiver for my team, sooner rather than later. So I hope to see that. Pete, you got any closing statements?
No, that's going to do it. Let's play ball.
All right. Yep. For anybody that has made it this far to the episode, I wish you the best of luck. For anybody that hasn't, you won't see it, but I hope that your team plays horribly this year. I hope that everything goes wrong for you guys. So thank you to all our loyal fans that love watching. And we look forward to doing. Should we do a power rankings episode right after week 1 or just a fresh week 1 reaction?
Maybe, we could talk about it. Maybe get 2 weeks under the belt before power rankings, maybe a guest next week, or we could go straight to power rankings. Either way.
Yeah, maybe it is time to work in a guest. Yeah, we'll brainstorm over the week. But all right, thank you to Sundog Multimedia. Thank you to Easy Peasy Moving and Service. That is the Lex and Pete show. We will see you next week.